I'm Patricia Watson. I'm the National Manager of Women in Film and Television, for anyone who doesn't know me now. It is my great pleasure to bring you this extraordinary panel who've been here for a summit that we've been conducting for established producers. With Script to Screen, we're bringing their expertise to the wider screen community, all of you. They've been here since the weekend, and they have been incredibly generous with their time. I've worked them to the bone, but hopefully they've still got a voice left for tonight. I would like to introduce you. It's my great pleasure to introduce you to each of them. So just starting in no particular order, except left. Matt Baker, Director of Acquisitions from HanWay, the world's leading sales agency. Carole Sheridan, who was executive producer at Scottish Screen and is now an independent producer, and her new film God Help the Girl was screened at Berlin and at Sundance. And when's it coming to New Zealand?
Not sure.
Working on it. Oh, yes, of course. HanWay might be the sales agency, as it so happens. And Joe Oppenheimer, who is commissioning executive for BBC Films, has been there for some time, so is responsible most recently for My Old Lady, which of course is doing incredibly well at the New Zealand box office. And to moderate tonight is Christina Milligan, who I'm sure all of you know, who is a producer and a lecturer in screen at AUT. So welcome, and this will be a very interesting panel. Thank you.
I take it these mics are on. Thank you. What we're going to do is I'm going to start the panel rolling with some questions. Be very happy for questions to come from the floor, particularly if the panel are talking about an area you just want a little bit more clarification on. We'll run for about 3/4 of an hour, and then I'm going to try and leave about 15 minutes for Q&A at the end. Because I think it's really important that those of you who are here who haven't had the opportunity to talk with these people in the last couple of days get the opportunity perhaps to ask key questions you might want answered. The topic that we're addressing this evening is cutting through the clutter of the global marketplace, and we really want to look at what are distributors, sales agents, potential international partners and audiences looking for right now. So wrapping that all up in one sentence, of course, is what are people buying right now? Matt, I might start with you since you're the sales agent on the panel, and I'll bring that question right along to hear from all of you as to what you see are the key trends. We may be talking about film or television, but principally, I guess, film right now.
Yeah, I'm definitely more comfortable talking about film. We don't have a TV arm, so I can really only talk to film. And if we take the American film market, which just happened in Los Angeles earlier in the month, as an indication of what buyers want at least, then the pretty simple answer seems to be genre. You know, assuming that you don't have an A-list cast, you don't have a Michael Fassbender or a Judi Dench. The projects that are selling that don't have those kind of marquee names tend to be the ones, science fiction, thrillers, horrors, kind of easily digestible films for distributors to put out into the world.
And within that, presumably, I'm just thinking of something like The Deadlands coming out of New Zealand at the moment, something that has a twist on it within a genre.
Yeah, no, that's a very good example, because when Matthew Metcalf was talking about that project, his pitch was so clear. You know, this is our kind of culture's version of 300. You know, and that's the kind of thing that distributors love to hear. You know, it's to the point. It's one of those high concept pitches. He's able to convey the mood of the film, the intention of the film, very, very clearly. And it was good to see XYZ, who's another sales company that we know very, very well. They were able to achieve some good sales, not just on the strength of the screening, but I think on the concept as well.
So, Joe, just leading on from that, from your point of view as commissioning editor at the BBC, are you always looking for material that's on trend in terms of picking up on what seems to be selling best at the moment?
No, we're not trendy at all. Actually, I did always used to say that if you wanted to characterise what sort of films BBC Films made, that we were the opposite of cool in every way, that we're not very interested in what is right now on trend, and we're not very interested in things, and the opposite of cool is also warm. And what we're interested in things that have great warmth to them, that are about real human stories, real human characters, and crucially, I suppose, when you're thinking practically, great roles for actors, because of course I totally endorse what Matt says. Pre-selling genre is an awful lot easier than pre-selling a dramatic story. And if you're going to try and set one of those things up, you need really, really solid cast. And given that, I mean, we do make genre films, but they tend to be very British. They tend to be British comedies. I mean, Mrs. Brown's Boys, the movie, which I'm sure all of you here have seen, or something that travels even not so well as that, like a kids' film we made called Nativity. Those genre films are fine for us, but obviously the bulk of the stuff that we do that travels are films like Mild Lady or Philomena or Saving Mr. Banks. These are dramatic stories that combine having hopefully a strong hook narratively, but very, very bankable cast. And I mean, this isn't rocket science. I think most of you, if asked by your friend to go and see a film at the cinema whose title means nothing to you, so it's not a book that you've read or something, well, the first question you'll probably ask is who's in it? And then what's it about? And on those two very quick summaries that your friend gives you, you'll decide whether or not to go and see it. And I think what we're finding in the UK, and I suspect is the case here, and Australia, and the reason I link those three territories, I think certainly a lot of the European territories have a sort of greater culture of supporting their sort of indigenous films. What we're finding with independent film is that you need a very strong hook, very strong cast, and 5-star reviews. If you don't have those three things, the audience just won't come. I think 10, 15 years ago, the idea was that you would decide with your friends or with your partner, yeah, I'm going to go to the cinema on Tuesday night next week, and we'll worry about what to see maybe that morning, maybe when we get there, but yeah, I want to go out and go to the movies. These days, people aren't doing that, anecdotally, it seems, I'm really worried that the whole thing is going to tip over that way. Everyone's sitting there, so maybe people should come across the stage and please walk across. Not at all offended.
Thank you.
And I think these days people aren't doing that. They're only going to the cinema if they absolutely have to, if there's a must-see film. And I think for that, you need all of those things.
So coming to you, Carole, as an independent producer now, and I'm thinking of your movie, which HanWay is currently working with you selling. From your point of view as a producer, did you go into that film with the three things we're talking about? I mean, heading into it and talking as you were going out into the market with the chance of those three things?
The film I made is a musical, so I guess I don't know if that fits within a genre
That's
category.
a very strong. Yeah, I think, Carole, I'll speak for you because it's hard to speak for your own film. I think it's a very strong hook, your film, because it's not just a musical, but it's a musical from an established artist with an established following. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was certainly part of the pitch when I met Matt with my fellow producer, Barry Mendel at the AFM, is that, there was a band that was already established worldwide, and that certainly was part of the appeal, I think, in selling the film. That was the thing that people kind of jumped on, really, and got excited by, so, yeah.
Yeah, so you worked with a US producing partner there?
I did. Barry Mendel, who did Bridesmaids and The Royal Tenenbaums, Sixth Sense. So he was obviously, is a very established producer, and I think that also helped.
And I think one of the things that we sometimes have difficulty with from here is finding the right partner, international partner to work with. I'm interested in hearing from each of you your take on how to approach that, really, how does a producer who perhaps is only establishing their track record find an international partner to work with? Matt, perhaps we could hear from you first.
IMDb is the very simple answer, because that's where I'm drawing most of my data from, and it's available to everyone. You know, IMDb Pro, if you don't have your own password, it's usually pretty easy to find a friend's password, sign on in there, and then it's all at your fingertips. You know, I don't think anything that we do is so much different in the UK than it is in any other nation, you know. Unless you're in LA and you're in the hub of where they actually make movies, and you're part of the kind of the water cooler conversation, you have to rely on articles, you know, Screen Daily, Variety, and piecing all these things together to kind of form the intelligence of you know, where to focus your search, particularly when it comes to looking for a partner. So, you know, if you're a New Zealand producer and you're looking for a UK partner, you can very easily say to yourself, okay, well, you know, what's the films that are coming out of the UK that I really love? Very quickly look at the production companies involved. IMDb Pro will give you the number, often the email for the person you should contact. It's there for all of us.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think, you know, to realise and understand that just as any producer in this room, or director or writer, is hungry for attention, obviously, but hungry for new projects, new ideas. Exactly the same applies to all producers across the world. And if you've found someone whose work you really admire and you think chimes with yours, they'll be delighted to get to hear from you, especially if you start your communication out of the blue by saying, I absolutely loved your film. I mean, that's never a bad way to start. And what's more, you'll mean it for once. And really, it's as simple as that. If so, you know, I've certainly been. I mean, obviously, you know, my job as a commissioner is to be perhaps more accessible and more obviously accessible than an individual producer might. But I've been tracked down by hundreds of people who, you know, often composers, funnily enough, are people who feel, you know, under-discovered and underappreciated, probably justifiably. And I get a lot of composers coming to me saying, you know, I want to work in you know, film composition. And you know, you know, basically he saw a film that I had produced that he absolutely loved the score of and thought there was something very interesting about it, and just tracked me down and emailed and said exactly that. And it's a film I'm very proud of. So of course, anyone telling me it's brilliant, I'm thrilled. And we met. We haven't worked together yet, I have to be honest, but the meeting happened. There's a partnership there. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, I mean, with God Help the Girl, it's quite an unusual situation because Barry Mendel was the first producer on the project, and then he came looking for UK partners. I know he spoke to a variety of people in Scotland and in London. He was very, you know, even somebody with so much experience and such a kind of attractive track record, he was very thorough in finding the right partners. So, you know, I think it doesn't really matter what level of producing that you're at. That thoroughness is really important because obviously the relationship that you have with that person is, you know, extends over a long period of time. You know, there has to be a very strong element of trust. So I think it's just go, find out, get as much information as you can. And also, if there's somebody that you think, yes, I really like their film, or Barry knew that I was a big music fan, so, you know, there were aspects of my working career and also my interests, I think, that helped. You know.
Yes, that's about quite a deep level of research in terms of finding out, you know, things that you might be particularly attracted to.
Yes, and by the way, I mean, deep level of research, that stuff that you can do on your own, you must do it. I mean, that's the only, if there were only, you know, 3 words of advice that I'll give to everyone in this room, is do the work. It's as simple as that. These things don't land in your lap. And everyone who is successful works incredibly hard. Harvey Weinstein, for all that he's renowned for all of these terrible things, is the hardest working man in the film industry that I know. Okay, everybody just does it. Just go and do the work. That's all it is. It really is.
Because we've got quite limited time, I'm just going to move on to another aspect now. I wonder if we could talk about how you see distribution going. Maybe, again, start with you, Matt. How you see distribution going in terms of platforms, theatrical versus DVD or theatrical versus VOD and DVDs quietly disappearing.
Yeah.
Do you see, and also talking about the shrinking of windows, which I know we've discussed in the last couple of days.
Yeah. I feel very strongly that we're looking at the collapse of the traditional model. The idea that the system we have now kind of works is completely broken at this stage. I don't think anyone's got the answers yet, but it was interesting. We've all had the opportunity in the past couple of days to see some people from Google talk. And of course, Google and YouTube, very soon they announced they're going to give you the opportunity to monetize your film on YouTube. So you as the content creator will just hit the upload button. You'll have worked out a system with YouTube where you can monetize that money going directly back into you. And that's the future. There's a filmmaker that we were very tempted to work with called Shane Carruth, whose work I admire very much. He's an American filmmaker. He made a film called Primer. And Shane, to me, is a very good model to where the independent system is going, because he's not the biggest director around. Maybe no one here has heard of his films, but he's got a following. In the film that he made, it was such a kind of cult hit that he knew his audience. And when we were talking to him about his new film, Upstream Color, we ended up not doing the film because we couldn't agree on the term of the sales contract. He just wanted a 5-year contract. And we said, well, why is that? That's unusually short. And he said, well, I don't think you guys are going to be around in 5 years' time. And in a way, he's right. I mean, that's the kind of thing, if you wonder about what keeps a sales agent up at night, it's exactly that sentence. And when you see how easy it is for a kind of a branded filmmaker to very cheaply, very easily connect with their audience, I think the onus is on all of us to kind of provide our worth in that world, because, anecdotally, when we started telling those stories, suddenly anyone who had kids started saying, oh yeah, my kids are on YouTube all the time, they never watch films anymore, they don't actually pay for films, they're not even watching TV, they're borrowing someone else's Netflix account. And that's the audience. So I think Hollywood will always win the spectacle war. I can't imagine there's never going to be kind of shared cinematic entertainment, but it's going to be interstellar, and it's going to be massive spectacle, and everything else is most likely going to exist in a very different level. So it could be self-distribution in the cinema if you come up with that special theatrical kind of cocktail, but most people, you're looking at a path that takes you straight onto video on demand, and increasingly it's going to be self-governed, and it's going to be self-regulated.
Carole, can I ask you, following on from that, how does that affect your thinking as a producer?
That's a tough one. I guess you think about the size, scale of the projects that you're putting into development, and I think, going back to the first question, what is the thing that an audience is going to identify with? It either has to be a story that has a sort of universal aspect, or a concept, I think, that's going to grab people's attention, or it is a case of, you need to be telling stories that have roles that are going to be interesting enough to good cast, which will also attract attention. So I guess, just thinking about, well, how do I reach people? What is the hook ultimately? I think with any content that I'm reading or researching, that is, that plays in the back of your mind, and it might be a variety of things. So, for example, I've got a project which is set in a Scottish island that creates malt, famous for creating malt whiskey. Whiskey is something that's known throughout the world for coming out of Scotland, and to me, that gives, it's a thriller, but it's got something that's quite unique and tangible, and that people sort of recognise or understand. And
do you think that's about having possibly and thinking about an older audience as well?
No, it's four 30-year-old men that go to this island for a whiskey tasting weekend, and things go horribly wrong. Because they stumble upon an illegal whiskey making operation, and they get sort of chased off the island. But so it's not necessarily thinking, you know, a particularly old audience, but I still feel that, you know, whiskey has a reputation internationally, and that's something that...
Is there anything better in the world than hearing Carole say the word whiskey? That's just brilliant.
No. So from your point of view as well, Joe, in thinking about how in reflecting on what Matt's just said, how does that affect your thinking as a commissioner?
Well, I have my head firmly in the sand about this, so not at all. No, it does. Look, I think obviously we all know the expression content is king. I think that is true, you know, that fundamentally, you know, this challenge that Matt won't be around in 5 years. I've seen him in the gym, he'll be around in 5 years, it's fine. That if you're a content creator or content, or in our case, more, you know, I have to be fair and say, you know, a facilitator of other people to create that content, you know, in the end, I trust that that will still be being made in 5 years' time. And obviously the BBC has adjusted and to some extent led the way in its own small way, creating iPlayer and having a sort of online catch-up service that everyone else has followed. So I think, I feel, you know, I probably personally do slightly have my head in the sand about it, but you know, I think the BBC does its best to future-proof its ideas and its content. I also think, as Matt said, we're at a very odd time of, you know, a broken model without the solution. And we're all scrabbling around, have been for a good 5 years, I think. And I think one very interesting example of that, you know, with the Shane Carruth example, I think it's true that if we can get to pure self-distribution monetized through YouTube, that's one thing. I think what I'm sure many people in this room have also discovered, but we've certainly discovered, is that I think there's a naivety about, you know, online social networking, those kind of social connections, and the way kids are watching stuff, and how that affects getting people into the cinema. I mean, the gearing, if you like, between having an online following and how that translates into tickets sold is incredibly disadvantageous. You know, we were sort of partly connected to a film that I've now completely forgotten its name, so I'm going to have to not tell this anecdote. And I'm going to have to immediately switch to another anecdote. I've completely... Ben Drew's film, what's it called? Can you remember his incredibly tough kind of urban drama that Ben Drew made?
Oh, Plan B?
Yeah, Plan B's film, yeah.
Oh,
Anyway, Plan B, whose film I've forgotten, and this probably encapsulates everything I'm saying. Plan B made a film, and he has a huge Twitter following. And obviously at the time, there's, oh, this is great. Well, obviously this means that we'll sell X many tickets. Of course we won't. Of course we won't. There is no correlation between people's desire to watch somebody on YouTube and the following they have on YouTube, or no significant financial correlation between that and their desire to go and buy a ticket in the cinema. So for as long as we're still talking about traditional distribution, looking at someone's, you know, online digital shadow and their presence and their following is much less helpful than you would like. And we're looking at these people who have these huge followings. But, you know, Simon Pegg can no more persuade his 4 million plus followers to go and see a film that they hear is a bit crap than, you know, that's great. He's a huge star. He's brilliant. And when he makes a good film, people go and see it. But if they hear that, well, that's not quite for us, it doesn't matter how many times he tells them, they won't bother. I mean, it may be different if they're not having to go to the cinema and they can just sort of lean over and turn it on at the same time as it's in the cinema. But at the moment, I think we're still in a place where, as someone thinking about content, I still have to think, wow, I've got to make this. I still have to imagine, how do I get someone to leave their house and go however long it takes for them to get to the cinema and spend that time. I can't forget that.
ill manners.
Thank you. You just looked it up there. You didn't remember it. Yeah.
So I know one of the things that came up in the last couple of days was the age of those who are going to cinema still regularly. It's the suggestion that it's skewing older. Does this affect your decision making?
Absolutely. I'd like to think we've been on the vanguard of that.
No,
we did a couple of films about 10 years ago, one was Becoming Jane and the other one was Away From Her. And for both films, I felt very strongly that we should be doing them, even though the market was telling us that the cast at that time or the story wasn't particularly attractive. But I just knew anecdotally that the people who were going to the cinema were my mum and her friends. And then a couple of years after that, something that Joe was involved in, Quartet, kind of landed on our desk. And no one at the company wanted to touch it. Actually, they weren't very attracted to it because they thought, oh, it's too doddery, too old. And I just saw it as a license to print money. Not only was it a wonderful, wonderful film.
Thank you.
But the crucial thing was there are a lot of people, say in their middle age, who are trying to make films for an older audience, and all they're doing is making films about death. And we've done a couple ourselves, but they're really depressing. And the genius trick of Quartet is it was imagining, it's set in a retirement home, you've got Maggie Smith, but it's like the girl arriving, the new girl at school. And she connects with people who she hasn't seen in a long time, and it was all about that. It was so relatable, I think, to anyone, and it was able to talk very truthfully about friendship, particularly friendship over time, but in a way that wasn't condescending to an audience, and it wasn't browbeating an audience with this kind of earnest need to kind of associate, old age with the end. And I think kind of going forward, I'm very mindful of that. It's odd, not many people picked up on that in Quartet. But you look at that in, Marigold Hotel, and I think both of them had a kind of a vibrancy to them and a kind of a life-affirming quality to the storytelling that, going forward, that's the audience. That's an audience that doesn't pirate your films. They generally go midweek, so it's not necessarily about having to kind of have that make or break opening weekend. They're a very loyal audience. They tend to go back time again and will bring their friends. And actually, in terms of the kind of social media of it all, Joe's right. The young kids are on Twitter, kind of firing out things left, right, and centre, but it never actually equals box office.
So if they don't have to go on the opening weekend and so on, do the exhibitors leave the film on long enough for them to gain traction?
Yes, because they're very, very aware of that pattern now.
They know. Then they're not silly. They've learned, and I think, you're absolutely right. Maggie Smith is also in My Old Lady, and she was quite clear to Israel, who directed it. She knows her power perfectly well. She has a stack of scripts, and she knows that everyone, if she says yes, the project's financed. And she said, well, I chose yours because I don't die in it.
Right.
I'm not giving plot away, don't I? It's fine. And that makes a huge difference. And I think Song for Marion, which was a film which, I suspect came over here as well, had a lot of the same qualities that you would expect to have performed. And I'm sure that a lot of the issues that it had were to do with, of course, look, no one wants to hide from death, but a lot of this audience, it's like, why do I have to be reminded of this? It's not what I want. I want to cope with it in a different way. I think it's absolutely true that I look at my mother-in-law's generation, and I say my mother-in-law because my parents, despite what I do, have never really gone to the cinema. And I think they particularly stopped when I started working in it. But my mother-in-law, she loves going to the cinema, as you say, with her friends. They're very loyal audiences. They actually have quite broad tastes. As we know, that generation, my parents' generation, they have the time, and they've got all the money. They nicked all the money with the pensions and everything else. They've got it exactly. They've got it easy, and they're going and going and going.
I just want to shift tack again slightly. Thinking about, I'm sorry,
I got my high horse there.
No, sorry. I was just thinking about a film here, which I'm sure you're aware of, called Boy, which is still at the top of our box office. Did extraordinarily well here. Great film. Didn't travel as people may have expected. So, is domestic box office a useful, and I'm interested in hearing your experience in Scotland also, is it domestic box office a useful indicator for you as to whether you're going to take a film on and how you think it might do?
It can be. I think we get very cynical, and you've got to take a kind of more nuanced view, because of course we're seeing the rise of kind of local productions having great success in local markets. So a lot of the kind of comedies that Joe was mentioning earlier in the UK, Mrs. Brown's Boys, the movie, or even The In-Betweeners, which was a beyond big success in the UK. I think it made like £45 million. One of the most successful independent UK productions of all time. Take that film abroad, you know, just going over the channel to France, and it's zero. So
Yeah, but that's France.
we've been France bashing all week.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think you've got to extrapolate from that. You can't just use local success as a barometer for how it's going to perform internationally. You know, there are some films that are laser focused on a local audience, comedies being the most obvious example. Whereas I think it's the old Woody Allen expression, isn't it? You know, my films never succeed too well anywhere, but they never fail too badly anywhere either. And in a sense, that's been true of the international market. You can kind of, you know, that's where dramas actually do have a kind of certain amount of exportability. There's always going to be a kind of a defined audience in each territory that will respond well to a beautifully made drama. But I wouldn't feel so confident about a beautifully made comedy and how I'm going to be able to sell that into Japan or into Korea, where, you know, their version of what's funny is very, very different from what an English audience might expect as funny, and, you know, that's harder to extrapolate.
So from your point of view, with your earlier experience in terms of your experience in Scotland, is this something that for Scottish producers, Scottish filmmakers, Scottish writers, that they're taking into their thinking in terms of how they develop a project, in terms of its wider market, its ability to travel?
I think we always think about the UK. I mean, Scotland's not a separate territory, although, I mean, the distributor that distributed God Help the Girl has identified that Scottish people do go and see, you know, they go and see, more Scottish people see Scottish films and are attracted to go and see themselves, if you like, represented on screen. But it's not a separate territory at all. So, you know, there's no distributor in Scotland apart from one distributor who buys old films and puts them back into cinemas. So, you know, we're always going to London to speak to sales agents and speak to distributors there.
Yeah, interestingly, it's not a separate territory. There is something that's happened more and more recently. I mean, I think it's always happened, but I've noticed it a lot recently with Scottish films, that I think because of the nature of the United Kingdom may be unique. It's not a separate territory, but increasingly,
it's a separate audience.
Yeah, people are previewing, but they're not really previewing. They're really having a separate release in Scotland. I mean, it happened with Sunshine on Leith very successfully. It happened with How to Train Your Dragon, I think. I mean, it seems to me a legitimate strategy now for distributors to go, actually, you know what, we're actually going to really launch this film in Scotland and do more than just two. I mean, it'll be 2 weeks before sometimes for some of those films. They did it with Filth as well, I think, where they feel, yeah, look, there is a loyal audience. And I think, it's presumptuous of me to say this, Carole, you should answer. Certainly in the UK as a whole and in England, there is no particular desire from the audience to support a film just because it's British, the way they would be in France or in Denmark. But I think that may actually, the exception to that is Scotland. I think a Scottish audience will go and see something because it is Scottish. Do you think that's fair?
I think that's probably true to some degree, yep. But just come back to your question about the value of a project and how you know what it's worth internationally on the basis of the domestic box office. I think the trouble with trying to measure that is that you will have your sales estimates, etc., before you'll actually know how the film performs in the box office. And obviously, you know, you need them to get your finance plan and you know, determine your budget. So it's quite difficult to know
chicken and egg.
If that's a.
And I think in terms of practical advice, by the way, to anyone here, unless you really, really know your stuff and have researched it, it's quite hard to anticipate, you know, what films will or won't play. And listen, I've been doing this for a little while, and I have so much to learn about the international market and rely so much on Matt and his colleagues and competitors because, well, A, it does change, but also I still haven't really learnt anything but the broad strokes of the national characteristics, and that, well, this territory just doesn't buy period films, but this one loves them, and the distinctions between the Korean buyers and the Japanese buyers and the Taiwanese buyers and Latin America and all of that. It's quite sophisticated. I did say to you all in this slightly school teachery way, do the work. I think when it comes to that, I think often, I certainly rely a hell of a lot on the sales agents to anticipate, to explain to me how that works. I think you can come unstuck if you go, well, I'm fairly sure this is great for the Korean market because it's got a Korean, character in it. And then you find that what you've done is you've created a genre or some element to the story. There's an absolute turn-off there. So I think, it's a delicate balance.
I think something that newer producers often struggle with is understanding just how important it is for them to get out into the marketplace and talk to people, most specifically talk to sales agents, particularly when when they have a project and they're trying to find out, for instance, whether certain actors are sellable and that sort of thing. Could you just talk for a few minutes on the importance of that? Because I think maybe it may be of some use to some members of the audience just to understand how crucial that communication and relationship is.
Well, you've kind of already said it in the question, but I'm also glad you said talk, not email. That's a particular bugbear.
Talk about that.
I get the time difference is a massive factor in that, but you can engage in with a sales agent, and you should engage with a sales agent as soon as you feel comfortable, as soon as you feel you're going to get a good response and have a good conversation, and talk to a lot of them as well. I hate to talk against my lot of sales agents, but we're a contrary bunch, and as soon as you realise that contrariness, that if you talk to sales agent A and they're saying these list of actors are good, but these list of actors no. If you talk to sales agent B, they give you often the completely different advice. That shows you something, and I think that goes back to the broken model, theatrical model of kind of names and value. But at the same time, that's the world we've still got to live in, and you can very quickly get a sense of who means what where, just by kind of polling as many different sales agents as possible.
And also understanding that sales agents, like producers, like everybody, have different taste.
Exactly.
And like to sell different things and so on, and finding the person that you can connect with.
Yeah. And also, you can persuade. I think you can be too led by sales. At least that's what Jeremy, my boss, tells me whenever his sales team disagree with him. And it's very, very true. I think I've been at a nice opportunity. I've met some amazing producers in my life, and you can see that some of them have that ability to, sell snow to the Eskimos, and you can make a case. I think if, say, an example that's been coming up a lot this week, you've got the right actor in the right role. To me, that counts for more than getting someone who's maybe has more value. But it's clear that it's all the kind of a machination just to try and get the finance. Distributors are human beings also. They have great, the ones I've been lucky enough to kind of talk to and meet, they've got taste. They get it. Actually, distributors are often the most kind of cine literate people you're ever going to meet. And they sniff that a mile away. So you've got to seek your own good opinion first, is the way I like to put it. And you've got to see, does that make sense to me logically? Would I go and see that film? Do I think putting that actor in that role is something that's going to be attractive? And then you've got to make it make sense with the market. Yeah,
listen, I do agree that you should talk to them, and it's really important. And I don't want to slag off sales agents, but obviously I'm about to. That's what I mean. But I think, as Matt says, you can persuade, and they can be wrong. We had it about 3 years ago. We had a film where we lost the lead actress, who was very bankable, and the finance plan was based around her, and for availability reasons, we'd lost her. And I sat down with the producer and the director and talked about possible lists, and it's a long list of very obviously bankable names, really big stars that we weren't going to get. And then, because we had just made a film called Brighton Rock, I said, how about Andrea Riseborough, who is obviously a wonderful actress, and James Marsh, the director, said, I love that idea, that's brilliant, she'd be perfect. we talked to him. So then went to the sales agent, and I remember it was Christmas Eve, and I had a very bad cold. I remember the conversation. I was very husky, which I'm sure made me more persuasive. No, but we said, we'd emailed them and said, how about Andrea Riseborough? And the sales agent said, absolutely no. Look, we're sure she's a brilliant actress. And we're going, yeah, she's brilliant for the part. But it won't be enough. It won't be good enough. The sales agent was a French sales agent, and a lot of their financing was linked to being the French co-producer, and they knew they could get a TV sale, a good TV sale. That's how these things work. That basically, as Matt knows much better than me, the French channel had a number that they were prepared to give for the old actress, and she was like, no way. And I said, look, Andrea's about to win a prize in Berlin for the leading kind of upcoming actress. She's got more and more roles. Believe me when I tell you that even if you can't sell her right now, you will be able to. And they're sick of hearing this from, because lots of producers say this, and it's never true. And I reminded her that we had told everyone that we had a really new star in our film and education called Carole Mulligan, and no one believed us then. And then, of course, what happened was she said categorically, no way, Andrea. 2 days later, she came back and went, oh, well, we've spoken to the French TV, and yeah, actually, the number's exactly the same. And she didn't know what Andrea was worth at that point, which is fine, by the way. I don't blame her for that. It was the certainty with which she was telling us that Andrea wasn't worth it. Actually, they don't know. How can they know? And because we stuck to our guns, we persuaded them. So I think if you are certain, don't be silly. Listen to experts. But if you really feel it, and your director feels it, or if your director's here and your producer really feels it, then try and persuade. Don't stop at the first hurdle.
We're going to go to questions from the floor in a few minutes, but I thought it would be good just to hear your thinking about the fact that in New Zealand, often films with a small enough budget, and I'm not talking low budget, but a small enough budget, can effectively find a way to get made through money from the Film Commission, also tax rebates, which the Film Commission here administers. One of the things that came through very clearly over the last couple of days is that if you're just looking at the soft money, you're not looking far enough, and that you need to find investors in front of your soft money, because otherwise the market may not want your film. Could I just hear your thoughts on that?
Well, private equity is becoming increasingly important to the financing of movies, and as governments around the world, they're in this kind of current race to kind of outbid each other to offer the most attractive tax credit for inward investment. Let's see how long that lasts, because we've seen that kind of come and go before. And I would imagine future governments, it's going to be increasingly hard to, explain that to the electorate, why they're giving big Hollywood movies, and then by extension the rest of us these massive tax breaks to make movies that make them all a lot of money. I mean, we see the sense of it now. We see it with the crews in New Zealand, in the UK. Both countries have a shared similarity right now. Our crews are working harder than ever. It's the poor producers who maybe aren't, especially the independent producers aren't getting paid, and then you find out your grip's earning like 4 times the amount that the producer is. Nice for the crews right now, but I wouldn't rely on it. What I would be looking to do far more is to identify private investors who, and usually it's because they've got a love of film, that they're going to kind of come with you. It's often very, very hard, particularly in the independent model, to show them a finance plan, to show them a kind of recoupment that they would understand in other businesses as being kind of directly led to profit. You do have to persuade people this is for the art and it's for the love. There's a bit of that goes on for sure. But they are becoming increasingly important. A lot of our most recent films have benefited from that greatly. And of course, the major talent agencies are the ones who kind of control the strings there more often than not. So maybe it's about forming relationships with them to get access to those private investors. They've done a very, very good job of kind of soaking up all the kind of obvious people from that list. But I think going forward, as we were talking, as I was talking about this kind of YouTube future, YouTube's not going to give you any money to make your film. I know they were kind of trying to sell us that line earlier in the week. I didn't believe it. That makes no sense to them. They can just happily sit back and earn 30% and not do a thing, as opposed to get into the kind of madness of being, the kind of the controlling voice. So if YouTube's not going to give you the money up front, who is? Because in that future, there is no distributor to give you the money. I mean, that's, producers are very quick to kind of be very unkind to distributors, but that is a very, very necessary function that they serve. And we've got to think of who the alternate's going to be.
Any further comments from you in terms of if a producer is coming to you, say, from the side of the world with a project that you are interested in, you might be interested in terms of the story and the potential that it has, and at the point that they're coming to you, they may have some film commission potential, they may have soft money from here but nothing else. Are you looking for them to see that they're a producer who can exist out in the marketplace and function there as well?
Obviously, I want them.
That was a terrible question.
Yeah,
but you got one
I do. Obviously, I want them to be able to function. That's what you're doing when you're meeting. You're doing two things, incidentally. If you're meeting someone new for the first time and hearing a new pitch, I'm both listening to the story and wanting to know if I'm excited by that, and can I trust this person to deliver what they're saying creatively, practically. And there are very few producers who have absolutely everything at their disposal, who have all of the contacts, all of the experience. That's one of the great things about being a producer, by the way, unlike being a director, is it's natural and desirable to partner up, and so you can find a producer who's equal and you're just sharing the work, or you have a more mentoring role, or however it is. Look, I'm going to steal our colleague and friend Paul's metaphor, who's now had to fly back home. Well, he's gone to Sydney, but which is this, there is an attitude that international co-production soft money is about a series of cash points that you just go to and put your card into and pull the money out, go on to the next one. And the reality is that one sadly doesn't have any cash left. This one eats your card. The third one, as you're taking the money, you get mugged and it all gets nicked from you by the middlemen. That's not how it works. And I can honestly say, when I've heard a pitch, the international co-production incentives are the 37th thing that I'm thinking about with that pitch. And only when I've decided to take that project into development and begin to wonder about how I might help these guys make it. The only thing you're thinking about is this a good idea, and are you a talented person? That's the only thing that matters. And actually, in that sense, for all of you out there, it's really easy. Because you shouldn't be worrying about that either until you've got your idea right. Because if your idea is really good, and you are talented, and obviously, you better believe you're talented, otherwise, I don't know why you're doing it. If you're talented and your idea is good, the money will be there. And if your idea is not good, it doesn't matter how much soft money you know about, it won't be any good, so don't bother. So don't worry about that until further down the line. Get your idea right, and then there will be an incentive in the world. There'll be some soft money that fits with your production, because everybody's doing it.
I think, Paul, one of the other things that he said is if you're thinking, how am I going to put this film together with a bit of soft money from here and a bit of soft money from there, then that's probably telling you that your film hasn't really got a market. You need some commercial investment which demonstrates that there is actually an audience out there for your film. So if you're only going down the we'll do this with soft money route, then you should maybe think about whether it's the right project to make, or whether you should think about something that has much more sort of commercial value and interest.
By the way, I may have just given a really terrible piece of advice, which is that you should certainly know enough about your domestic incentives so that you don't look like an idiot when you talk to me. That if you're a New Zealand producer and you have a meeting with me, it's unlikely, but I might at some point go, and do you think, it might work as a co-production? What are the, incentives? What's the offset? And you go, oh, I don't know. That doesn't look good. So you should certainly know what you might easily be bringing to the table. I don't think you should be worrying before anything else about how the international things work. By all means, do the research, but it's much less important than getting your story right and letting that tell you where to go in the world. Yeah.
Thank you. I am aware of time passing, so I'd quite like to open the floor to the audience now. We have questions out there? Yes.
I'll kick it off. I just had that, you talked really right at the beginning about what's on trend, what's happening right now, but if you're at the really early point in a project, you're a long way away from what you're going to look at in terms of what the audience are doing. How long are trends lasting? What's the turnover? You know, if you're making a genre film now and horror's hot, what happens? How soon is it not?
Well, of course, I have the specific answer to that. And I think horror's an evergreen. It's very hard to see that market dying off. Horror audiences, horror fans are incredibly loyal. I think the great thing about them is they don't seem to differentiate between studio and independent, between big budget and low budget. If it's cool, if their friends are recommending it to them, they find it out. I love that about horror. But you're right, I mean, everything's cyclical. I'm sure everything I've said today about the genres, ask me again in 5 years' time, I'll give you, maybe, if I'm still here, a completely different answer. Yeah, I mean, it all goes back to the same advice about seeking your own good opinion first, because, you know, the advice I can give about an actor, let's say you're kind of building your screenplay with a certain person in mind, their value could change dramatically. And I always use kind of Colin Firth as a good example of that. When I kind of first started working for HanWay, you know, we had a project with Colin Firth pretty early on. I was told by my sales team and the market, you know, Colin Firth can't get arrested right now. And then, of course, he did the film with Tom Ford, A Single Man. He then went on to do The King's Speech. And the first thing they asked me, you know, can you get us Colin Firth in that project? So extrapolate from that.
Yeah, I think it's a very good point to be very cautious of you know, quick turnaround ideas for film. I'd also give you advice to be very cautious of anniversaries in film. Speaking as someone, you know, in an organisation who just made Testament of Youth in time for the anniversary of the First World War, and we felt we needed to do that. Two big advantages there. One, we kind of had to do it. BBC Films had to make a film that was about the First World War. Secondly, that anniversary is lasting for 4 years. So that was a pretty safe bet. But I'd be very cautious of those for theatric reasons. And yeah, just trying to stick to things that you believe are universal.
Other questions? Yes.
Can I please have some views about the short films? Like, how do you see that market, and what is the future you see, and what best is, like, you know, put a short film, good short film, like local production, like Newslet short film, to your attention? What best can be done?
I think short films, in theory, should be, you know, going through a boom right now because they're ideally suited to YouTube and that sort of online thing. I don't see it myself. I mean, it may be that they're happening. Short films have proved useful calling cards to directors for us in the past, but much less than you would think. We make a lot of films with people who are making their first feature film. In some years, as many as half our films are made that way. But very few of those directors have gone straight from making short films to feature films.
Can you talk broadly about what sort of backgrounds they come from?
Absolutely. They have made, a large number of them have been working in high-end TV drama. Probably where they have had the chance, what I would look for is where they've had the chance to set the style of a show, to cast it, to put it together, all of those things that you would expect. We are looking at directors who have worked in theatre. Generally, you know, not just 1 or 2 plays, but with a really kind of established theatre career. They obviously lack quite a lot of skills where filmmaking is concerned, but what they have is generally incredibly good skills with actors, incredibly good relationships with actors, and an understanding of telling a story over a sustained period, and crucially, something that very, very few independent filmmakers and short filmmakers have, is an understanding of the relationship between audience and the work. Any theatre director has had the experience of previewing their show and sitting there and watching the audience watch it and changing what they do. And that is vital, and people underestimate that. And a good theatre director's ability to do that is really, really useful when it comes to making films. And my experience is that they are, you know, for all that they might be making very recondite, unusual work that they want to be challenging and isn't sort of genre and, you know, multiplex fare, they still understand that, no, this is for an audience and they're going to sit there and watch it. And they hate the fact that they can't do previews, and they actually love audience testing. That the theatre directors that I've worked with, my current favourite, Rufus Norris, who's unfortunately the film industry has lost for a while because he's running the National Theatre in London. All he wants to do is to put the film in front of people halfway through the process, and he's learnt that from the stage. We use documentary makers, people who've made full-length, you know, feature docs. I mean, so it's from anywhere.
It's a range.
Yeah, and it's a real range. And I think I've got one piece of advice to short filmmakers: make them funny. So many short films, honestly, make me want to kill myself. And they're normally about an old man who's making a boat and thinking about what he did when he was young. Or...
I love that one.
Yeah, you love that one, yeah. So please make them funny. There's a really terrifying, totally non-scientific statistic that I've got from a very good friend of mine who's a teacher who teaches media studies at a large school in just north of London. And he gets the kids to make a short film when they're 16. And he says 90% of the kids make the same film. That the boys make a film about gangsters, and the girls make a film about getting raped. Seriously, it's incredibly depressing. Don't do either of those things.
On that cheerful note, another question at all? Someone else out there? Yes.
Just from a couple of things that you've been talking about tonight, you talked about the soft money and the commercial money kind of idea, which is really interesting. You talked about the director of Primer, and he knew his audience and he knew who he was targeting for. But yet, what about people who go on Kickstarter, who are raising money because they have this social media audience there going, but yet it maybe doesn't deliver? So I think I read yesterday Zach Braff's movie maybe didn't do as well as people thought it was. So I just wonder, like, he was expected to have this audience, but he didn't. But he was getting money from his audience to make it. So what are your thoughts on, like, it's just so convoluted. What are your thoughts on audiences informing and helping raise money, but then maybe not?
Well, I think I would argue, and I should let Matt speak because he's obviously, you know, talked to Shane and worked with him. That goes back to what I was saying about that online following doesn't translate into their desire to go to the cinema. I think that's exactly right. I read probably the same piece as you about Zach Braff's film, but, you know, presumably those were fans of his that were going on Kickstarter and, you know, giving this money because they were going to get the signed photo and the other thing, and why not? And it's $10 and I'll get all of the other stuff, and well, fine, that's great. Oh God, do I actually have to go to the cinema to see? Oh, that's boring. You know, if we get to a point where by funding it on Kickstarter, you then get the link sooner than everyone else, and those eyeballs count to the success of the release of the film, it'll probably work. But what you're not doing is getting those people to actually get up off their asses and go to the cinema.
I think that was true of the Veronica Mars film as well, wasn't it? I mean, you don't want to have a future where you have 10,000 producers as opposed to 2 or 3. I could see that going really wrong. And Carole and I did have some experience on Kickstarter with God Help the Girl, because Stuart Murdoch did utilise that very, very well. And he kind of gave the nice incentives. You know, if you give you this much, you get a signed copy of the script. That much gets you a director's chair. And I think the biggest one was you could have a cameo in the film, right?
Yeah, and I think somebody paid $300 to come and call it a rap at the end. So there was...
We'll take anyone's money at a certain stage. I just want to quickly say the thing about shorts, because I'm not sure I agree with Joe. Shorts are an incredible way to spread you know, who you are as a filmmaker. And you can see, like, even popular websites like IO9, you know, they may be obsessed with sci-fi shorts, but that website is viewed by Hollywood executives. They have commissioned films, you know, from filmmakers just by watching an insanely good short. I think that's a very exciting way to actually kind of get out there and get into the marketplace, and that's just going to grow and grow because you know, the quicker bandwidth we have, our ability to kind of share these short films is going to make them very, very enticing. And back to kind of Kickstarter and social media, it's proving to be a bit of a minefield. No one's got the answers. I think, Kickstarter's had some success, but it's always with big people that everyone's heard of, and I don't see that changing either. I think the idea when it first started that there was going to be this forum where films could benefit in the way that like other technology does. I'm not sure, you hear about the Oculus Rift, and that generated many, many millions on Kickstarter because everyone got that idea. And I thought, how wonderful. It's never going to quite be that way with film. I think it's a bit of a misnomer. I'd still look more towards finding high net worth individuals more than you're going to kind of get the money from everyone.
I think our film was the most successful UK dramatic feature to run a Kickstarter campaign at the time. So we did actually raise quite a significant amount of money. But what was interesting about it is it also unearthed some investors who came to us to say, well, we don't want to give just $300. We want to potentially invest $50,000. So, it was a useful tool for us, but we had a profile because of the band. I think that just if it's just a regular filmmaker with whatever the story is, I think it's harder to get any kind of real proper exposure, and I think it's become, I think people are getting a bit tired of it. I think we were lucky that it was kind of the timing of our campaign was when people were just starting to recognise that it existed and were quite interested in it. But I think it can be helpful, but not completely sort of reliable as a tool ultimately.
Thank you. I'm just aware of the time, and I understand that there is a play on here tonight. And I think, given that it's 7:30, it's probably time to say thank you very much to our guests.